Thank you so much. Welcome to Observability Anti-Patterns. Before I get started, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Adriana Villela, and I am a senior developer advocate. I love solving hard problems, whether it's part of my day job or on a rock wall, which is where you'll find me blowing off steam when I'm not at work. I'm also a CNCF ambassador. I am a second-year HashiCorp ambassador. I write a tech blog on Medium. I'm co-host of the On Call Me Maybe podcast. And I have been doing the computer things for about 30 years, if you count the fact that I learned how to code in BASIC at age 10, thanks to my dad. So I'm kind of old. Now, as I stand here before you, I can't help but be in awe over the fact that when I graduated university 20 plus years ago, told you I was old, we were at a time where we were starting to talk about surfing the web on our mobile phones, shout out to flip phones. We were starting to move away from those little 3.5-inch diskettes to USB flash drives. The Google search engine had been around for 3 years. Monoliths were king. Java was the hot new language. And cloud, what cloud? Now, fast forward 20 plus years, and our software has only gotten more and more complex. I mean, we are at the point where we rely on software for pretty much everything in our daily lives. I mean, even our cars are powered by software, and our fridges are powered by software. This is bananas. So we are dealing with increased complexity, and that means that back in the day, when we were troubleshooting our systems, it was relatively straightforward. I mean, it was still annoying and complex, but it was relatively straightforward compared to now. Now we're dealing with these microservices that are interacting with each other, and there are thousands of microservices interacting in ways that are often unpredictable. We have no idea what's going on sometimes, and so we need a way to be able to understand what's going on behind the scenes, and that's where observability helps us out. Now, I'm super excited for that because, I am in the observability space, and we are starting to see more and more organizations embrace this observability thing, which is awesome, but I also find myself in a situation where I've been in this space long enough to see that there have been a fair share of observability anti-patterns out there. And so today, I'm here to talk about not one, not two, but 6 observability anti-patterns and what you can do within your organizations to try to avoid them to achieve observability greatness. And this applies whether you're an individual contributor or a manager. It does not matter. You can do something to help out. But before we get started on that, I want to set the ground rules with some terminology. So just very basic gloss over some terms so that we are all on equal footing. So of course, I'm going to start with the definition of observability. There are tons of definitions of observability out there. For the purposes of this talk, I'm going to use the definition that I feel best explains it, which is observability, or O11Y or OLLY, lets us understand a system from the outside by letting us ask questions without knowing the inner workings of the system. Now, what does that mean? It means that the system is emitting enough information so that you can follow the breadcrumbs to answer the question, why is this happening? But how does the system emit that information? With our other term, OpenTelemetry. OpenTelemetry is a vendor-neutral framework. How many people have heard of it? I'm sure it's like pretty much a bunch of people. So OpenTelemetry, vendor-neutral, it emits telemetry. It is used to ingest, transform, and export telemetry data to an observability backend, which is the thing that renders that pretty data for you so that you can follow the breadcrumbs to answer the question, why is this happening? It's a CNCF project. All the major observability vendors are all in on it, so this has become the de facto standard. All right, next term that I'm going to review, service level indicators. Service level indicator, 2-dimensional metric, answers the question, what should I be measuring and observing? And an example of an SLI is something like number of successful requests over total number of requests, or it can be something like number of requests completed in less than 10 milliseconds over total number of requests. And why do we need SLIs? Because we need them for SLOs, or service level objectives, which are informed by SLIs, which is just a fancy way of saying they're built on SLIs, and they answer the question, what is the reliability goal of the service? So if we took our SLI example from earlier about number of successful requests over total number of requests, that's our success rate, we might want an SLO to be targeting, say, 95% success rate over a 28-day rolling period. So that's the basic terminology, so we're all on equal footing, and now we can start talking about those lovely anti-patterns, or what I like to refer to as high crimes against observability. So, high crime number one is undervaluing the trace. Now, before I get into this, I do want to establish the fact that, the three signals that we know and love, traces, metrics, and logs, at the end of the day, all they are is events. Now, they are all specialized events, so each one serves a specific purpose. My beef is when organizations put so much weight on either metrics or logs or a combination thereof and forget about our poor little friend, the trace. That's not to say that metrics and logs aren't important. After all, metrics are great because they gave us aggregation of values. So, for example, they're great for telling us things like CPU utilization, memory utilization, number of requests for a given service, the amount of time that it takes for a service to be executed. That's awesome, but it's aggregated data. So can we dig in further into that data? Not so much. So we don't know what's happening in the greater scheme of things. Then we've got our friends logs, which we all rely on at some point in our careers, right? I mean, I've gone into log files and looked at the various log messages, trying to find that little needle in the haystack. Oh yeah, this thing happened at this time. Logs are great. They tell us about the thing that happened at a particular point in time. But in relation to what? What are the things that led us to this point in time where we are seeing these things? And so, how do we make sense of it all? Well, if you're guessing traces, that's a pretty safe bet. What I want to see is traces being made first-class citizens in our observability world, and metrics and logs being relegated to supporting actors. Again, it's not to say metrics and logs suck and are not important. That is not the case at all. I'm just saying, let's make them part of our overall narrative. Traces are key because they tell us the thing that is happening overall, from start to finish of your request. What happened end to end? What happened between services? What happened within a service? Traces can tell us. Then we can take our friend the metric and say, hey, if we have a way to correlate that to a trace, we have even more understanding of what's going on. Same thing with logs. If we're able to take our logs and correlate that to a trace, again, we are now starting to form the picture of the thing that is happening. All right, high crime number two, the wall O dashboards. This one's a little bit of nails on chalkboard for me. Now, as an example, I worked at an organization where I was reporting to the CTO, and I was running an observability practices team, and he goes to me, your team should go and build dashboards, and we should put them on these big monitors and mount them on the walls, and it's going to be awesome because I did this at my previous organization. It was super, super successful. And I'm like standing there thinking, how do I tell this guy that this is a really terrible idea? Like, this was useful maybe like 10 years ago, but we're living in this complex world of microservices. There's like a lot of really, complex interactions. The Wallow dashboard simply will not do. I mean, yes, this was a common practice across the industry, right? We've got the dashboard, problem occurs. Let's check the dashboard. Let's do some querying. Oh, we found a new problem. Okay, let's schlep it onto the dashboard. Awesome. So now we're schlepping more things onto our dashboard, and our dashboard is so cluttered with crap that we don't even know what's going on anymore. It's like information overload. And also, what are you going to do? Like, every time there's a problem, put it on the dashboard? I mean, if we could predict every problem that there was out there, I certainly wouldn't be here. I'd be filthy, stinking rich. I wouldn't be talking here right now. So what would we do instead? Do we dashboard all the things? I say no. Instead, remember our friend the SLO? Well, we create SLO-based alerts. So basically this means that we set a target. If that target is breached, we set off an alert. We correlate that target back to our observability data. So then now two things happen. One, we're told, hey, there's a problem. And two, now we can follow the breadcrumbs to answer the question, why is this happening? Much more convenient, and we go from now trying to find a needle in a haystack to a much more directed search. All right, high crime number 3, not instrumenting your own code. I'll go back to my previous role of managing this observability practices team, and my CTO manager turns to me and says, so Adriana, you and your team, y'all have to instrument the application code for the developers. And I'm like, oh crap. Gotta tell this guy again that the thing he's asking me to do is like absolutely ridiculous. What do I do? And the thing is though, it's like this is common practice. A lot of organizations, I hear so many stories across the board of organizations knowing, hey, I need to instrument my code, my house is on fire, this observability thing is gonna be worthwhile, but I ain't got time to instrument the code, so let's find some other team to like go instrument the code. And that is extremely problematic because say I'm instrumenting, I write the application code, all right? So I'm debugging my code. As I'm debugging, I know the information that's important to me to debug my code, right? I know what I need, I know what I'm missing, I know what I need to look at. And then say I go, hey you, why don't you instrument my code for me? You'd be like, okay, I can instrument something. Will it necessarily be the thing that I need you to instrument? Possibly not. I mean, that's no better than me saying, you can write my code comments for me and you can write my unit tests for me. It makes zero sense. Now, it can be very daunting to instrument your code, especially if you're getting started with OpenTelemetry, right? It's another thing that you have to learn. So there's a learning curve. On top of that, if you're still wanting to develop new features, you don't want to stop doing that to put things on hold to instrument your code, but think of it this way. If your house is on fire, shouldn't you put down the tools and stop building the room that's burning and instrument your damn code? I mean, this is basically the same thing. It also means coming to the realization that, I think the scariest thing of this whole thing is knowing that when you're having to instrument existing code, it basically means, oh, this is like new technical debt that I didn't even know I had. So it's like on top of the other technical debt. But this is a worthwhile exercise, so it is something that's worth doing, stopping, taking the time to do. The other thing that's important when instrumenting your code is making sure that you identify the high-touch areas. So if there's a particular service that keeps getting called over and over and over, perhaps that's a pretty good candidate for something that you'll want to instrument first. Or if you have any homegrown libraries or frameworks, again, instrument those because chances are your code will probably be touching a bunch of these over and over and over. And then finally, get into this lovely practice of observability-driven development, which is instrument your code as you work. And then that way, at least you're not leaving a trail of more technical debt as you write your code. You're taking care of the stuff, of the instrumentation as you go along. Okay, next we have, before we go to the next high crime of observability, I do want to leave you off with this lovely quote from On Call Me Maybe podcast guest, Liz Fong-Jones, who does put it quite perfectly.
Grown-up software engineer, write your own damn tests, right? Like, so write your own damn comments, write your own damn observability annotations, right? Like, this is what will help you understand your code later. Someone else writing it for you achieves like very little of the value.
There you go. Well said, Liz. Don't just take it from me. All right, high crime number 4, belief that observability tools equals observability. Now, think back to the DevOps movement when it was gaining steam, and how many organizations could you think of that would say, I have Jenkins, I am doing DevOps, yeah! And we're kind of seeing similar things happening in the observability space, where, hey, I'm instrumenting my code with OpenTelemetry, and I'm sending it to an observability backend. Therefore, I have observability, mission accomplished. And of course, that is not true, because observability is all about practices, just like DevOps. So, what does that mean? Well, it means that you need to do things like instrumenting your code as you go. When you're instrumenting your code, ask yourself the question, am I instrumenting enough? And am I instrumenting enough data? Because ultimately, you want to be able to follow the breadcrumbs to answer the question, why is this happening? If you're not following the right breadcrumbs, you can't answer the question, why is this happening? You need to also be able to, when you deploy your code to production, don't do what I call the deployment hit and run, which is, hey, the thing deployed successfully to production, mission accomplished, let's go home. Yeah, that's awesome, but that's not going to cut it, because when you deploy your code to production, something magical happens. Humans interact with your code, and we act in really unpredictable ways. I mean, all the tests in the world cannot predict how like some human with a very strange use case will interact with your code. So don't just deploy your code and just leave it there. See how it is doing in production to make sure that it's doing the thing that it is doing. And finally, again, our friend the SLO, make sure that you get into the practice of creating those SLO-based alerts so that if and when there is a problem, you've got the directed search, so you can follow the breadcrumbs to answer the question, why is this happening? Next, we have what I call observability theater. So thinking back to our agile transformations and our DevOps transformations and our digital transformations, right? All worthy causes, right? These are all great transformations to be having, but a lot of the times you have these organizations doing these half-hearted attempts at implementing these transformations, and it was all for show. It's all theater, and then they'll be like, I wonder why that didn't work. And it's a failure, and then they'll call in the consultants to try to fix it for them. We can't have that. I mean, and unfortunately, we're seeing the same thing with observability. Again, it's theatrics, it's for show. We need to do away with that. So what do we do instead? Well, it's all about making sure that you advocate for observability within your organization. Observability is ultimately a paradigm shift, and so that means that you have to open your mind, be curious, to allow it to permeate and really do its thing. So in order for observability to take hold in an organization, we need two things to happen. We need convergence from the top, and we need convergence from the bottom. From the top, we need executives to actually buy into this observability thing, not just for show, but for realsies. I'm part of the OpenTelemetry end user working group, and recently we had somebody come in and talk to our user community about how they work in a company that really fosters an observability culture. And the wonderful thing about it is that there is directive from the executive saying, thou shalt do observability. And also, developers are the ones instrumenting their own code. Which means that if you have some disgruntled development team saying, I don't have time to instrument my code, tough shit. It's a mandate from the top, that's what's going on. So they can't go and try to circumvent this thing because that's been mandated. Now, that's one half of the puzzle, because yeah, it's great that it's mandated from the top, but if the people doing the thing don't want to do the thing, well, that's useless too. So we do need to have that grassroots movement of people who believe in the power of observability and have experienced it firsthand to advocate internally. And that means making friends who believe in observability internally and externally. bringing use cases, right? Success stories from outside, success stories from inside. If you're trying to advocate for observability within your organization, nag your manager and nag them some more and do some POCs to prove that this thing actually works. So then when we have that convergence of top and bottom, then we have a good chance of having this wonderful observability culture where everybody will thrive. And finally, we come to high crime number 6, not treating observability as a team sport. Now, I've noticed that a lot of organizations have this tendency of dumping observability concerns on one team. Typically, it seems to be that, observability ends up being dumped on like an SRE team. But the fact of the matter is, it is a team sport. We have tons of teams working together to make it happen. And this starts earlier in the SDLC, as we saw earlier, right? When developers are instrumenting their code. Developers instrument their code, and it helps them troubleshoot their own code. But then when they hand it off to QA, the QAs now have this lovely instrumented code, and they can actually use that information and use observability to troubleshoot anything that occurs when they're doing their tests. So that if something goes wrong in the test, they can go to developers and say, hey, you know what? This thing is wrong, and I can tell you why. Or if they're troubleshooting, they find a bug, and they don't know why, they can say, hey, developer, there's a problem, I don't know why. That's still a good thing, because it tells the developers, hey, I'm actually missing some instrumentation, right? Again, it's about having that information so you can follow the breadcrumbs. So you're helping the developer. But we can take it one step further with the QAs, because they can leverage those lovely traces, the trace-first approach, observability-driven development traces, and they can actually take those traces and create integration tests from those traces. And that is known as trace-based testing, and there are some awesome tools already out there that do that, including Trace Test, Helios, and Malabai. So these things do exist. And then finally, we make it all the way over to our awesome SRE, who is the benefactor of all this lovely work. So now the application's been deployed to prod. You're troubleshooting any potential issues in prod while the application has been instrumented. And so because it's been hopefully instrumented fairly well, they can follow those breadcrumbs to answer the question, why is this happening? Or if they realize, oh crap, I don't actually have enough information, no problem. Take that information, send it off to the developer and say, hey, you're missing some instrumentation. No problem, it's an iterative process. We can't get it right perfectly the first time. And then finally, again, using that instrumented data so that they can create those lovely SLOs that are tied to observability data so that if something happens, they get that alert. Hey, there's a problem. Hey, this is where you look to go find it. So there you have it. Observability is a team sport, and don't forget that. So in a nutshell, today we learned what not to do to achieve observability greatness. So we keep the following things in mind. First of all, we make traces, first-class citizens, with our supporting actors, the metrics and the logs. We say bye-bye to the Wallow dashboards and hello to SLO-based alerts. We encourage our developers to instrument their own code because they know the things that are actually important for instrumentation. We also want to make sure that we treat observability as practices and not tools. We say no to observability theater. And finally, we treat observability as a team sport. Now, before I conclude, I like to finish off my talks and my blog posts with cute pictures of my rats. I am a rat person. They're like little tiny dogs. This is my rat, Phoebe. She is named after the Friends character. She is coming up on 2 years old, so she's like a little old lady rat, and she loves to burrow into little things. So that's Phoebe. If you are interested in any of the topics that I discussed today, I have some lovely references. You can scan the QR codes to check these out. I've got the article on observability anti-patterns that I wrote, which was the inspiration for this talk. I have a blog series on Medium about all of my explorations around observability, plus a couple of great book recommendations, Cloud Native Observability with OpenTelemetry, and if you want to dig into SLOs, Definitely recommend Alex Hidalgo's book on implementing service level objectives. And of course, OpenTelemetry. And also wanted to acknowledge the fact that I do not have the artistic talent to draw those amazing capybara images. However, I do think I make a decent prompt engineer. So, I do thank our evil AI overlords, Dolly, for being able to generate those images. Please do follow the On Call Me Maybe podcast. If you scan this QR code, you can find us on all the socials. And finally, if you would like to connect, you can scan this QR code to follow me on all the socials. Until next time, peace, love, and code. Okay.
All right, we've got a few minutes. We can do some questions. Any questions from the audience? I see one right there.
Do you have a recommended stopgap for SLO-based alerts? Because I have a first-hand experience where the company starts creating SLO-based alerts and then realizes we need an SLO for every service, every method, because they're different. So you end up with 1,000 SLO-based alerts replacing all regular 1,000 method-based alerts.
Okay, so do you have a stopgap for SLO alerts?
I do remember reading an article recently about, I think it was a company called Zalando, and where they found themselves in that particular situation. And so they actually scaled back on the number of SLOs. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, like, SLO creation is a very iterative process, and they found personally that they had too many SLOs, and so they scaled back on their SLOs to really zero in on the ones that were most important to them. So that might be one approach to take around that.
Thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions? I see one right over here.
Can you go back one slide?
Oh yeah, of course.
Was this the slide in question? Okay, great.
Not the rat picture.
Awesome. Any other questions? Oh, yeah, I see one over there.
How do you deal with people who are obsessed with dashboards and demand them?
How do you deal with people who are obsessed with single panes of glass?
Oh man, I mean, honestly, with my former boss, it was a constant fight. I won't lie. It was extremely painful because he was very hey, this worked at my previous organization. It's going to work here, and I'm like, dude, just give it a chance here. I think part of it is kind of wearing them down and nagging them to prove your point otherwise. But I think ultimately you do have to be able to demonstrate that their way is not as ideal as the way that you want them to go into. But I think there's no right answer, because some people are just very, very, very headstrong. So even getting other people from other organizations who have done this and presenting, hey, this person has done it this way. Why don't you listen to them if you don't believe me? I think those kinds of stories where you can share external stories can be very compelling.
And I think a follow-up?
Yeah, so a follow-up to that would be, do you believe in no dashboards ever? And I ask this because I'm doing all the APMs for all the teams because developers won't instrument their own damn code. And all the directors and all the VPs want a service health dashboard. All the SLIs, all the SLOs, are we green, are we red? Is that a bad example of a dashboard that's more management-oriented, or is that also an ANSI pattern that should be less avoided in favor of trust your SLO-based alerts?
So my oversimplistic summary of that one for the stream is, do you advocate for no dashboards or ...
I believe the ideal scenario would be more dynamic dashboards. So you would have a dashboard of your SLOs, because the SLOs are based on a metric, and many dashboards are based on metrics. So I'd say using that as a starting point, you can. I think you can hopefully appease the people who are very dashboard happy.
Oh, got a question up top.
Similar question.
If my manager says all alerts have to point to a dashboard, how can I tell them that they don't know what they're talking about?
I mean, start with, you don't know what you're talking about, but say it very politely.
Very nicely.
Very politely. I think, oops, I fiddled with my mic, sorry. But I think at the end of the day, the only way to make the compelling argument is to like show them with the way it ought to be. Because otherwise you're just going to keep having this argument in circles over and over and over. But I think part of it does have to start with saying no, because a lot of these executives don't like being told no. They certainly don't like being told that they're wrong. And I think it's part of our jobs to be able to say no. My saying is always like, you're not doing your job well enough if you haven't pissed someone off at least once a day. So.
It's very true. All right, maybe time for one more question. Also, just a reminder too that for every speaker, there is a channel in the Slack that you can continue the conversation. Also, there's the great breaks and whatnot that you can chat with other people. But let's see, was there one more question, I think? Maybe not? All right. Oh, wait, no, there is. Here we go.
So how do you suggest shifting the mentality from like a log-first mentality to a traces-first mentality?
How do you shift from a log-first to a trace-first mentality? Love that question.
I think, again, it's one of those seeing is believing scenarios. Like, you have to prove. So at my previous organization where I had the very demanding CTO, being able to demonstrate that, hey, like taking a POC, taking like either an existing application or a small application where you can instrument some of it and show, hey, look, this is what happens when we're going the trace first approach versus the just focus on logs approach, I think makes for a very compelling narrative, because now you're showing to them, oh, this is how it can work. This is how it can benefit you. But again, like being able to demonstrate, I think, goes a long way.
I will say it was the best use of the word schlep. And if there is not yet an open source tool to move metrics and logs and traces from one place to another, it should be created, and it should be called schlep. All right, let's give a big round of applause for Adriana.
Thank you.